welcome back, and in this segment we will be learning more about portrait photography through the work of photographer Ahmed Rahman. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, first of all, let me ask you about why did you choose this part to work on?
Portraits in specific?
Yes,
or
yes, portrait.
It's a personal preference, honestly. I've always been fascinated with faces and facial expressions, to the extent that at a certain time I can almost, with confidence...
because many people, they are interested in nature, for example, but the idea that the portrait also is not that easy.
It does not, and I know a lot of people who specifically or strictly say that they don't like to photograph people. But for me, this has always been my main interest. And in studios, specifically instead of streets, because in studios I can trigger the exact expression that I want with the exact lighting that I want. It's a very controlled environment that allows me to project what I see in my head.
Mr. Ahmed, how long have you been, let's say, taking up photography as, it's a hobby most probably, or is it your profession?
It is a hobby for the most part, but a serious hobby at that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing it since 2012. Mm-hmm. This is when I decided to seriously pursue the knowledge and the know-how and the experience, and decided to focus on studio portraits since then.
You mentioned something that we would like to talk more about it, that you have the control when you are in the studio to bring out the expression through your conversation with the one you're going to take the portrait for. Tell us more about this, and how can you reach this level? I mean, through this portrait, it can tell something.
It certainly does. The thing about portrait photography, and this I was told this from day one, is that as with every specific genre of photography, you need to have certain skills that are not related to photography or cameras or lighting. With portrait, it's the ability to understand exactly how people are triggered, what exactly triggers a certain emotion, the state you want to be in, and be able to trigger that on demand. With some people, I just tell them to act in a certain way, and they, like with musicians or athletes, the ones that I shot. With other people, it takes a lot of conversation. And
you are working with athletes as well.
Yeah. This was the project. I don't strictly work with athletes, but this was the current project, and I found them in a certain manner as musicians, for example.
There is a photograph. Would you explain to us that photograph and tell us the situation associated with it?
Yeah, this is Gianna Farouk. She's the current #1 ranking karate player in the world. Mm-hmm. This was basically, we were trying out different poses and different expressions and different moments in the game. This is what I was telling them too, is like, imagine that you're in a game, tell me what you're doing. And this is what they were doing.
But you didn't think about taking such a photo for her, for example, while playing? Because when it comes to the athletes, it is completely different. I mean, you are talking about someone who can really give you many different expressions while playing as well.
They can, but it's very difficult. Specifically, it needs very specialized equipment. Very
because of the speed
lens.
of the shutter, because they're moving.
Exactly. It's very specific.
No, of
lenses.
course, I know you cannot take them while moving, but the point is that if he is standing in the place where he is playing or something like this, he is taking a picture at the end, or a portrait, so he can just stop and you can take it. If he's a squash player, for example, while he's playing, and just to stop the movement, something like this. But of course, you cannot take him while moving.
No, I can actually, and there are equipments that can take photograph a still image of the player that is moving, but at the same time, the entire environment will not be what I have in mind. And this is the difference between studio photographers and documentary photographers. Is that documentary photographers have the ability to absorb what's around them, while studio photographers mostly focus on what's inside their head.
I've noticed that the picture was in black and white. Why did you choose to do it in black and white?
For intensity purposes mostly. I wanted to show that they've been through a lot. They struggled a lot and they trained. There's a lot of dedication to their art. And it needs to be portrayed with as least distractions as possible. And this is mostly done through black and white.
We have another photograph.
Budi, Abdul Rahman Ayman. He's a 16-year-old champion, professional swimmer, a Down syndrome professional swimmer. We started this. He was one of the very first people that I reached through a Twitter post that he didn't have enough exposure. And as usual, as with most people who were mentioned on social media, he didn't have there wasn't any good photograph for them. So I got in touch, and basically what we did is we were in the studio, and he was in full gear, and we sprayed water on him to mimic exactly the moment of coming out of the pool.
When do you decide to choose whether we are talking about colored or black and white?
Depends on what I want to portray. Depends on what I want, the message or the impression that I want to give. Sometimes it's there's more than one dimension. There's more than one element, and I need them all to be emphasized. This I will choose colored, and I will manage it accordingly. If there's just one element that I need all the focus to be on it, I will choose. Usually, I will choose black and white.
Now, for your photographs, do you use certain types of modern technology in it, or do you just do the shooting? Do you later on like re-edit it or add certain touches to it?
Of course,
do you
I
do
do.
photoshopping sometimes?
There's a lot of photoshopping involved as well. Studio photography in general, it's more associated with the image that you have in your head. And a lot of people, especially because most of my friends were documentary photographers, they shun Photoshop and editing. But a good friend of mine who is also a studio photographer also told me, you use what you can to project the image in your head. Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever you need. So there's a lot of Photoshop involved, mostly to erase the background and enhance the lighting and to make sure that the athletes are exactly portrayed the way I see them in my head. It's not about reality anymore.
Sometimes you feel that when you see certain athletes or people that you want to take a portrait for them. Just as you mentioned right now that you contacted him to take this photo.
Yes, my main inspiration is mostly their dedication to their art, which is something that honestly inspires me. And
it satisfies you.
It satisfies me, and it's also nice that I can give them these photographs as gifts, like art for art. I'm gifting them my art in appreciation to their own.
What about the story of the photograph on screen?
This is a Brazilian art form called capoeira. I used to play it. It's a martial art disguised as a dance. The idea was basically to capture motion but in a still picture. So we did a technique called light painting where the shutter stays open for a long time so it captures all the light that is being made while using flash. So flash in order to freeze the moment, but the light in order to show the motion where it happened. And this was the idea behind the shoot. This was a group actually I know personally, and it was a very difficult shoot to execute.
Now when you work, do you take multiple shots and then choose the best, or you do a storyboard of one particular certain shot and you work on it? Like, do you do multiple or just one?
Mostly multiple, but I like to be flexible at the same time. So I would define exactly the impact that I want with a few examples, and after doing those, I sometimes improvise, sometimes I let the subject or whoever subjects improvise themselves, and afterwards on the computer I choose which one is the best. Sometimes I actually recompose, like I take part of this photograph, and put it on this one. I like the expression in this one, but the posture is not right. But it's very similar to the one I like, so I would Photoshop the face in, and it's basically that, you know, just whatever you need.
But it needs a lot of study, right? Because some people believe that it's not that difficult. I think it's difficult from all what you're saying.
It is very difficult. The main thing that I always got told, especially during this series, is that I always get this remark is, I didn't know it was this difficult or this complicated, because there's a lot of lights, there's a lot of modification, metering, adjustments.
It is not just a face, for example.
It's not just lighting. It is mostly lighting. When a studio, you don't have anything else except the lighting that you set up yourself, you know, on your mind. It does
But
take a
to
lot
set
of
up lighting again is not that easy, I believe.
It
so.
is not at all, unfortunately. But passion makes it easier for me.
Yeah. No, I've noticed so far, but I don't know about the other pictures, but for the photographs we've seen so far, I've noticed that you're using a dark background mainly. Is that always what you prefer, or sometimes do you put sometimes like a background, or you add a background with a picture to the scene?
Sometimes no, it's not a specific preference for the black and whites, because like I said, it would emphasize mostly the subject. For other items, for other photographs, I need them to be more realistic. So I would choose a location with a very specific background. With some photographs, I know that I will need to crop the background, so I will choose a gray one. But yeah, like the photograph on the screen right now, this was an actual street. This was shot in a street and at like 12 a.m. We were a group. They were helping me, so things were really tricky, because you have to get it as soon as possible and just pack up and leave. Because obviously a friend dressed like that at 12 a.m. is not very safe.
How long will it take you to take the exact expression you want to take?
It depends mostly on the subject and how well I know them. Some people
So
are...
you need to sit and talk and to know the person before the procedure. It's a real procedure that you have to follow, for example, before
Sometimes
the
I
portrait.
do. Sometimes through their social media and through the things that they use to express themselves online.
So you mean when someone will come to you and ask you for a portrait, you cannot just take it immediately?
No, it's very difficult for me.
So how do you do it? I mean, what are the procedures?
It's more about what I deduce than what they do. For example, there was a corporate portrait shoot. I told them that I will need to sit with each one just to chat for 5 minutes beforehand, and this is exactly what we did. I would sit in a room, each one of the subjects would come, and we would just chat about anything. What they like to do, the movies, what they like about their work. And through their answers and their expressions, I take notes. Like, he doesn't like this, for example, this makes him laugh. And I would remember that this photo was part of the campaign, mostly an awareness campaign for trafficking against women. It was meant separate photographs to highlight the forms of trafficking. This form, I don't know how to say it in English, but it's mostly with the female debtors. That sometimes husbands take credit or take loans with their wives as trustees, and then they will flee.
Yeah.
So this was one of the photos.
So it's not a portrait, but it's...
This is not a portrait. This is more commercial or how they call it, illustrative.
Now, when you do something like that, would your technique and the way of work differ than if you're doing a portrait?
Very much. This is a very staged photo, and there's a lot of directing involved. It's not as spontaneous, or it does not require as much focusing on the moment as a portrait. With a portrait, it's very tricky because there's very small muscles in the face that a person does not control consciously. A person needs to be in the exact same state that you want them to in order for these muscles to be perfect. And you have to wait for that moment. For illustrative photographs like this one, it's mostly posing and prop setup.
But the idea is that also you are delivering a message through this, and this is also another challenging part.
Yes, and specifically these messages, because these photographs were meant to be as an awareness campaign for very uneducated and people in undeveloped areas for the most part. So they needed to be direct and with little depth as possible, but at the same time captivating. This was a challenge. Mostly people in art do not prefer shallow work, but I knew that it would have been, this is the necessary format for the audience, the targeted audience. And we tested it, and we tested like on a small group, and they liked it, so we went ahead with the vision.
Now, how do you describe the field of photography right now? Is it and about the recipients, like for photography exhibitions and other? In Egypt, of course.
In Egypt, in the sense of photography in general, I believe there's a very strong movement when it comes to photojournalism and photo documentary. Egypt is quite a gold mine when it comes to things that could be documented in a very unique way. Mm-hmm. When it comes to commercial and studio photography, there's not that much improvement, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Not too many standards from abroad have been adopted yet.
Yes.
As opposed to photojournalism and documentary.
Well, photographer Mr. Ahmed Rahman, thank you very much for this interview, and wish you all the best. And by this, we come to the end of this episode of Breakfast Show. But first of all, I have to thank my colleague Nashwa Rashid. Thank you very much, Nashwa.
Thank you very much, Rasha. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of the Breakfast Show. And remember to join us tomorrow with our colleagues for more on the Breakfast Show. Well, of course, you are in the company of Rasha Modi and Nashwa Rashid. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up on Nile TV International.